"From you belong to me now," the outlaw whispered. But his voice broke when he saw her tears. The wind howled across the open plains, carrying the smell of smoke and gunpowder. The sun was sinking low, bleeding its last light over the horizon, when Jace Callahan and his gang thundered toward the Harrington ranch. The sky burned orange behind them, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to what he was about to do. For years, Jace had dreamed of this night. Every sleepless hour, every memory of his brother's lifeless body left to rot near the railroad tracks. All of it led to this. The Harringtons had taken everything from him, and he was going to take something back. Revenge, he told himself, was justice. The ranch house came into view, a grand white structure surrounded by rolling fields of golden grass. Jace's jaw clenched. He remembered riding past this place as a boy, when he and his brother worked nearby. Back then it looked like heaven. Tonight it was hell waiting to be claimed. "Burn it if you have to," Jace growled to his men. "But bring me Evelyn Harrington alive." He barely remembered giving the order, yet moments later the air filled with chaos, shouts, horses screaming, windows shattering. Flames licked the edges of the barn as Jace dismounted, his revolver drawn. He moved like a shadow through the smoke, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with purpose. Inside the main house, Evelyn Harrington stood frozen at the top of the staircase. The noise outside was unreal, men yelling, gunfire cracking through the night, but she didn't run. She held her mother's locket to her chest, trembling yet defiant. Her father had gone to town that morning. The ranch was unguarded. She knew whoever had come was after vengeance, and somehow deep down, she knew it was meant for her family. When Jace kicked open the door, their eyes met for the first time. He expected arrogance, fear, or screams. Instead, he saw quiet shock and something else. Not guilt, not cruelty, just confusion and grief. "Jace Callahan," she whispered, recognizing him from the wanted posters. "You shouldn't be here." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. "You think I came here to talk? Your family's got debts to pay." "My father's not here," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Whatever he did, he fired a warning shot into the ceiling, silencing her. "I don't care where he is." "You'll do." Two of his men appeared behind him, rough and eager. They started toward her, but Jace raised a hand, stopping them. Something about the way she stood, barefoot, dressed in a simple nightgown, her golden hair half loose from sleep, made his stomach twist. She didn't look like the enemy. She looked like someone already carrying too much pain. "Please," she whispered. "You don't have to do this." Jace hesitated, the firelight flickering across his scarred face. For a moment he almost turned away. But then he remembered the blood on his brother's shirt, the cries that still haunted him. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her close enough for her to feel the tremor in his hand. "You belong to me now," he said hoarsely, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. She gasped, eyes filling with tears, but not for herself. For him, and something in Jace broke. The revenge that had burned inside him for years suddenly didn't feel like justice anymore. It felt hollow, cruel, wrong, but it was too late. The ranch was burning, his men were waiting, and he had just crossed the line he could never uncross. Without another word, he lifted Evelyn onto his horse and rode into the night. The flames behind them swallowed the only home she had ever known, and Jace Callahan, outlaw, avenger, broken man, rode away with both his captive and the first flicker of doubt in his hardened heart. "From you belong to me now," the outlaw whispered, but his voice broke when he saw her tears. The ride through the desert was long, brutal, and silent. The moon hung high over the wastelands as Evelyn Harrington clung to the saddle, her wrists tied and her eyes fixed on the endless horizon. She didn't cry, not once. The outlaw who held her captive, Jace Callahan, stole glances at her every now and then, half expecting her to beg for mercy. She never did. They reached the outlaw camp before dawn. It was hidden deep within a canyon, surrounded by jagged rock walls that caught the morning light like dull blades. Fires burned low around tents and wagons. Jace's men, rough-looking, lawless, and eager for spectacle, stopped what they were doing to stare at the woman their leader had brought home. "Look what the boss dragged in," one of them jeered. "A fine prize for a man who don't believe in love." Jace dismounted, his expression unreadable. "She's not a prize," he muttered. though the words barely convinced himself. He untied Evelyn's wrists, but she didn't move away, just looked around the camp with quiet disgust, her chin lifted high. "Where are you taking me?" she asked softly. He met her gaze. "You're staying right here." "With me," the men laughed. Someone called out, "Then let's make it official." Another voice joined in, mocking, "Ain't you gonna marry your little hostage, Jace?" Jace froze. The laughter rolled through the camp like thunder, mean and sharp. He could have silenced them with a single glare, but instead he turned to Evelyn and saw something in her eyes that made his blood burn. Not fear, but pity. He couldn't stand it. "Fine," he snapped. "You want a show? Then you'll get one." He grabbed a rusted iron ring from a saddle strap and slipped it onto Evelyn's trembling finger. "By outlaw law," he declared loudly, "this woman is mine, my wife, my vengeance." His voice was low and rough, cracking under the weight of his own words. The men howled with approval, clapping him on the back, tossing their hats into the air. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the ring as though it were a shackle forged from her worst nightmare. Slowly she looked up at him, her voice shaking but clear. "You can take me by force," she said, "but that doesn't make me yours." Her courage caught him off guard. She was supposed to cower, to plead. Instead, her eyes burned with quiet defiance. Jace's smirk faltered. "You'll learn," he muttered, trying to sound sure. But his heart was pounding, his chest tight. Why couldn't he look her in the eyes? The men drifted away, leaving them alone by the fire. Evelyn turned from him and knelt beside the flames, staring into them as though praying for them to burn her pain away. Jace lingered nearby, watching her in silence. The ring on her hand gleamed dully in the light. "You hate me," he said finally. She didn't look at him. "No," she whispered. "I pity you." The words hit him harder than any bullet. He turned away, his jaw clenched, staring into the dark canyon beyond the camp. He'd imagined revenge would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like chains, cold and heavy around his heart. That night, when everyone else slept, Jace lay awake in his tent, listening to the wind whistle through the cliffs. He could hear Evelyn's quiet breathing from where she rested under guard near the fire. Every sound from her side of the camp tore at something inside him. He'd sworn she'd pay for her father's sins. But as the dawn began to break, painting her face in pale light, Jace realized something he couldn't bear to face. He wasn't punishing her anymore. He was punishing himself. From "You belong to me now," the outlaw whispered, but his voice broke when he saw her tears. The sun was already high when Evelyn Harrington awoke to the sound of horses and clattering pans. The outlaw camp was alive with noise, men laughing, arguing, and drinking even before noon. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the canyon walls and remembered everything. Her wrists were sore from the ropes that had bound her the night before. Someone had cut them loose while she slept, but the red marks remained, angry reminders of the night her world ended. She sat up, drawing the thin blanket closer, scanning for an escape route. But everywhere she looked, there were men with guns. And him. Jace Callahan stood apart from the rest, his hat pulled low, his broad shoulders tense as he cleaned his revolver. He didn't laugh with his men or drink with them. He looked tired, hard, broken in ways that went beyond the scars on his face. Evelyn didn't understand him. He was cruel, yes. He'd taken her, humiliated her, forced a ring onto her finger. Yet there were moments when his voice trembled, when his eyes looked away, as if ashamed of the man he'd become. When she tried to stand, a hand grabbed her shoulder roughly. One of Jace's men, Burke, a heavy brute with a wicked grin, shoved a tin cup toward her. "Drink," he ordered. "You'll need your strength. The boss don't feed dead wives." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she took the cup. "If you think I'm afraid of you, you're wrong," she said. Burke laughed. "You should be." Before he could say more, Jace was suddenly there, quiet, fast, dangerous. He grabbed Burke by the collar and slammed him against a wagon. "Touch her again," Jace growled, "and I'll bury you in this canyon." The camp fell silent. Burke spat dust, eyes wide. "She's your prisoner, not your queen." "She's under my protection," Jace snapped. Then, more quietly, "That's the end of it." He released him and turned away, his hands shaking just slightly. Evelyn watched, stunned. For a man who claimed she was nothing but payment for his pain, he seemed strangely desperate to keep her safe. Later, as the heat pressed down and the camp grew still, Jace found her sitting near the corral. She was brushing one of the horses, a chestnut mare with a bad leg. Her movements were gentle, patient. "You shouldn't bother," he said. "That one's half wild. Won't ever be much use." "She's hurt, not useless," Evelyn said without looking at him. "There's a difference." The words hit him harder than she knew. For a long time he said nothing. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry earth and smoke. He finally muttered, "You don't know what kind of man I am." "I know you think revenge makes you strong," she replied softly, "but it's eating you alive." He turned sharply, his eyes flashing. "You think you know me. You don't know what your family did." "My brother—" "I know about your brother," she interrupted. "Everyone does. It was a tragedy. But do you really believe my father ordered it?" Jace froze. The certainty that had fueled him for years wavered for the first time. He owned the railroad. He wanted the land. "My brother got in the way." "Don't tell me it was a mistake," Evelyn's voice broke. "It was. You're punishing the wrong people." He stared at her, silent. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw regret flicker behind his eyes, but then he turned away, hardening again. "Don't lie to me, Evelyn. I've lived with ghosts too long to believe in innocence." That night, Jace sat by the dying fire, staring at his hands. They trembled. The ring he'd forced onto her finger haunted him. Every time he saw it glint in the firelight, it reminded him not of victory, but of shame. He had sworn he'd never feel again. But every time he looked at Evelyn Harrington, the woman who should have been his enemy, his heart betrayed him a little more, and for the first time in years, Jace Callahan feared something more than the law. He feared himself. "From you belong to me now," the outlaw whispered, but his voice broke when he saw her tears. Days passed in uneasy quiet. The desert heat was merciless, pressing down on the outlaw camp like judgment from the heavens. Evelyn Harrington worked in silence, doing whatever small tasks she could to keep her mind from breaking, feeding the horses, mending torn shirts, tending the fire when no one else would. Every night she prayed for a chance to escape, but deep inside, she prayed for something else too. That Jace Callahan would find peace before his soul turned completely to stone. Jace watched her from a distance, pretending indifference. But he saw everything. The way she refused to flinch when his men barked orders, the quiet strength in her hands, the gentleness with which she treated even the most vicious horse. He hated how much he noticed her, how much she made him remember the boy he used to be before the blood and the bounty. One afternoon, a dust storm rolled in from the south, scattering the gang's supplies and driving them into the caves that cut through the canyon walls. Jace and Evelyn ended up trapped together in one of the smaller caverns, sheltering from the raging wind. For the first time since that terrible night, they were truly alone. Evelyn sat near the entrance, her hair tangled, her face streaked with dust. "You can stop pretending you hate me," she said quietly. "You don't have to keep up the act." Jace's eyes narrowed. "You think this is an act? You think I don't have reasons?" "I think you've forgotten what those reasons are," she replied. "You talk about revenge like it's your god, but you never asked what really happened to your brother." Her words struck deep. He took a slow step toward her. "Don't!" he warned, his voice low and sharp. "Don't you dare speak about him." But Evelyn didn't stop. "You believe my father had him killed. That's what everyone says. But you're wrong." She looked up, meeting his storm-gray eyes. "It wasn't my father. It was the railroad foreman, Wes Dunbar. He stole from the payroll and blamed your brother when he found out. My father tried to stop it, but by the time he did, it was too late." Jace froze. "You're lying." "I'm not." Her voice broke. "I wrote to you, Jace. I sent letters to the mining town where you worked after the war. I begged you to come talk to us. My father wanted to make it right. He even set money aside for your family. But the letter was returned unopened." His breath caught. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "That's impossible. I never got any letter." "Because Dunbar made sure you didn't," she said, tears slipping down her dust-streaked cheeks. "He didn't want the truth coming out. He disappeared a month later with half the railroad's funds." For a long moment, the wind outside was the only sound. Then Jace staggered back, as if her words had struck him like bullets. His heart hammered painfully in his chest. Could it be true? Had he spent years hunting the wrong enemy? "I burned their homes," he whispered. He couldn't finish. The weight of his sins pressed down like the desert heat, suffocating him. Evelyn reached out, her voice trembling but kind. "You were wrong, Jace, but it's not too late to stop being the man they turned you into." He stared at her hand, torn between shame and longing. For the first time in years, tears burned behind his eyes. He turned away before she could see them. That night, the storm passed. But inside Jace Callahan, something else broke, a dam of fury and grief that had defined him for half his life. The truth had set him free, but it also left him hollow, because now he understood the full horror of what he had done. He hadn't just destroyed his enemies. He had destroyed the innocent woman who could have been his salvation. "From you belong to me now," the outlaw whispered, but his voice broke when he saw her tears. The storm passed, but its echoes lingered in Jace Callahan's mind long after the wind died. The truth Evelyn had told him gnawed at him with every breath. His revenge, his entire reason for living, had been built on a lie. He could barely look at her now. The sight of her, the sound of her voice, reminded him of everything he'd done wrong. The marks on her wrists, the ring he'd forced onto her finger, the fear he'd seen in her eyes. Each memory was a blade twisting in his chest. The gang noticed the change. Burke, the meanest of them, started whispering behind Jace's back. "The boss has gone soft," he told the others. "That little dove's got him tamed." Jace ignored it, but the tension grew like a sickness in the camp. His men wanted to move on, raid another town, rob another train, but Jace couldn't bring himself to lead them. His hunger for blood was gone. All he wanted now was to undo what couldn't be undone. That night, when the moon rose over the canyon, Jace made his choice. He walked to where Evelyn sat by the dying fire, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked up warily when he approached, expecting another command. But his voice was different, low, rough, and strangely gentle. "You were right," he said. "About everything," Evelyn blinked, startled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you don't belong here." He dropped a small satchel at her feet. Inside were coins, water, and a folded map. "Take the North Trail. It'll lead you to the old pass by morning. You'll find a wagon road there." Her breath caught. "You're letting me go?" Jace looked away. "I should have done it the first night. You were never the one who needed to pay." She studied him in the flickering firelight. "What about you?" He gave a humorless smile. "There's no road for me, Evelyn. Not anymore." Before she could speak again, he turned and walked away into the darkness. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before taking the satchel. Her heart pounded with fear and gratitude all at once. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she believed the pain in his eyes. He wasn't lying this time. She moved quietly through the camp, keeping to the shadows. The canyon was still, save for the soft murmur of men sleeping and horses shifting in their pens. She was almost free, almost. A hand shot out of the darkness, seizing her arm. Burke. His grin gleamed in the moonlight. "Well now," he drawled, "where do you think you're going, Mrs. Callahan?" Her breath caught in her throat. "Let go." "Can't do that," he said. "Boss might have gone soft, but I ain't. You're worth a fine bounty on your own, sweetheart." Evelyn struggled, but he was too strong. She kicked, clawed, and managed to scream, just once, before he struck her across the face. The world spun, then came a voice sharp as thunder. "Let her go." Jace stood a few yards away, revolver drawn, eyes blazing with fury. Burke laughed. "She was running, boss. You gonna shoot me for stopping your runaway bride?" "Maybe I am," Jace said coldly. "Step away from her." Burke hesitated, then spat on the ground. "You're finished, Jace. You ain't no leader no more." He reached for his gun, but Jace was faster. The shot echoed through the canyon, scattering birds into the night. Burke dropped where he stood. The camp exploded into chaos. The men shouted, grabbing their weapons. Jace grabbed Evelyn's hand. "We have to go, now." Together they ran through the maze of rocks, the shouts of pursuit ringing behind them. Horses screamed, gunfire cracked. Jace took a bullet in the arm but didn't slow. He pulled her up onto his horse, blood dripping down his sleeve. As they fled into the dark desert, Evelyn clung to him, her tears mixing with the dust. Behind them, his old life burned, just like the ranch he'd once destroyed. For the first time in years, Jace Callahan wasn't running toward revenge. He was running toward redemption. "From you belong to me now," the outlaw whispered. But his voice broke when he saw her tears. The desert stretched endlessly around them, silent except for the rhythmic pounding of hooves and the ragged sound of Jace Callahan's breathing. His arm burned from the bullet wound, but he didn't stop riding until the canyon was only a faint scar behind them. When the horizon began to lighten with the first glow of dawn, he finally pulled the horse to a halt beside a grove of twisted mesquite trees. Evelyn Harrington slid from the saddle, trembling. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, but she was alive. Jace stumbled as he dismounted, clutching his bleeding arm. "You're hurt," she whispered, rushing to steady him. He winced, his breath catching. "It's nothing. It's not nothing," she said sharply, her tone full of the same stubborn compassion that had haunted him since the night he took her. "Sit down, Jace." For once he didn't argue. He sank onto a patch of dry grass while she tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it against the wound. The blood soaked through almost instantly, staining her fingers. He tried to speak, but she silenced him with a look. "Don't talk. Just breathe." The command in her voice was soft but firm, and for a moment, Jace almost smiled. Here she was, his captive, his supposed enemy, tending to him as if his life mattered. He'd faced death a dozen times before without fear, but the way her hands trembled over his skin frightened him more than any bullet ever had. Hours passed as they found temporary refuge in an abandoned line shack near a dry riverbed. The walls were half collapsed, the roof leaking, but it offered shelter. Evelyn built a small fire and boiled water while Jace drifted in and out of consciousness. When he woke again, she was sitting beside him, her head bowed in prayer. "You still believe God listens to you?" he rasped. She looked up, startled, then nodded. "I believe he listens to anyone who asks with a sincere heart." He gave a bitter laugh. "Then he's been ignoring me for years." "Maybe," she said quietly. "He's just been waiting for you to start listening back." Her words settled over him like the crackle of the fire, gentle, persistent, impossible to ignore. He turned his head away, ashamed of the sting in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here. After what I did, you should have left me to die." Evelyn met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Maybe I should have. But I couldn't. Why?" "Because somewhere beneath all that anger," she said softly, "I see the man you used to be. The one your brother must have loved. The one who still knows right from wrong, even if he's forgotten how to live it." Jace looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "That man's long gone." "Then let me prove you wrong." She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. For the first time, he didn't pull away. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was fragile, almost sacred. Over the next few days, Evelyn nursed him back to strength. She cleaned his wound, forced him to eat, and shared what little food they had left. At night, when the cold crept in, she sat close enough for him to feel her warmth, but never close enough to make him uncomfortable. One night, as the firelight flickered across her face, Jace found himself speaking without meaning to. He told her about his brother, about the night everything went wrong, about the years he'd spent chasing vengeance because he didn't know how else to keep his grief alive. Evelyn listened without judgment, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. When he finished, she said only, "He wouldn't have wanted this for you." Jace's throat tightened. "No," he said hoarsely. "He wouldn't." For the first time since his brother's death, Jace slept without nightmares. By morning, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. It was small, uncertain, but it was there. He watched Evelyn as she stood by the window, the dawn light catching her hair, and a thought crossed his mind that terrified him more than any gunfight ever could. He didn't just owe her his life. He was starting to owe her his heart. The days that followed in the broken shack were quiet, too quiet. Jace Callahan had healed enough to ride again, but not enough to silence the guilt that had taken root inside him. Every glance at Evelyn Harrington reminded him of what he'd stolen: her safety, her peace, her name. She'd been his captive once, but now she was his conscience, and that was a heavier chain than any iron. One morning, as the sun rose pale and cold over the horizon, Jace saddled his horse without a word. Evelyn woke at the sound, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Where are you going?" she asked softly. He paused, staring at the saddle's worn leather. "To end it," he said. "And what?" "My running." He turned toward her, his expression hollow but resolute. "I can't undo what I've done, Evelyn, but I can stop it here." I'm turning myself in, she stood, startled. Jace, if you ride into town, they'll hang you. You know that. He gave a faint, bitter smile. Maybe that's what I deserve. No, she said, stepping forward. You've changed. You saved me. That has to count for something. Not in the eyes of the law. He swung into the saddle, his wounded arm stiff but steady. You said once that God listens to those with sincere hearts. Maybe he'll listen if I try to do one thing right before I go. Evelyn's throat tightened. You think this is right? Leaving me here alone? He hesitated. Her eyes, blue, fierce, full of mercy he didn't deserve, held him like a tether. If I stay, he said quietly, they'll find you too. And I won't risk your life again. She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't just saying goodbye, he was already gone inside. When he rode off, the silence left behind was unbearable. Evelyn's heart hammered with fear, anger, and something deeper she refused to name. She tried to tell herself it wasn't her fight anymore. But as the day wore on, her resolve crumbled. She couldn't let him face the gallows alone. By dusk, she was riding hard toward Dunhill, the nearest town, a place where the sheriff's badge gleamed brighter than mercy. When she arrived, the streets were crowded. Jace was already there, standing in the dusty square, his hands bound, his hat gone. His face was bruised from the ride, but his eyes were calm, almost peaceful. The townsfolk watched like vultures circling a dying beast. Evelyn pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. "Stop!" she cried. "You can't do this!" The sheriff turned, frowning. "Ma'am, this man's wanted for murder, robbery, and abduction. The law's clear. He's not the man he was," she said fiercely. "He's saved lives since then, mine included. You call it abduction, but I call it redemption," the crowd murmured. Jace looked at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Evelyn, don't," he said. "Don't throw your name away for me." "I'm not," she said, stepping forward until she stood before him. "You once told me I belonged to you. But the truth is, you belong to something greater now, a chance to start over." Her words silenced the square. Even the sheriff hesitated. Finally, the old judge, who'd been summoned to oversee the outlaw's capture, cleared his throat. "The law punishes deeds, not hearts. But if what this woman says is true, then perhaps there's a debt still to be measured." He studied Jace for a long moment before speaking. "You'll stand trial. Not as an outlaw, but as a man. And she," he nodded to Evelyn, "may speak on your behalf." The sheriff grumbled, but nodded reluctantly. As they led Jace away, he turned to Evelyn, his voice rough with emotion. "You should have stayed away," she smiled through her tears. "You once stole my freedom, Jace. Now I'm stealing yours. From despair." For the first time since his brother's death, Jace felt something close to hope. The woman he'd taken as a prisoner was now his only witness, his only chance to live as more than a shadow. And as the night fell over Dunhill, both of them knew the reckoning had begun, not just with the law, but with the past. The jail in Dunhill was small, its walls thick with dust and regret. Jace Callahan sat on the narrow cot, hands clasped, staring at the sliver of dawn bleeding through the barred window. He'd spent his life running, from the law, from his guilt, from himself. But for the first time he wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. The trial had lasted 2 days. 2 long, grueling days in which every sin of his past had been dragged into the light. Robbery, assault, abduction, it was all true. Yet when Evelyn Harrington took the stand, the air in the courthouse changed. She didn't defend what Jace had done. She defended who he'd become. He was lost, she told the judge, her voice steady but full of feeling. But he found a way back. He saved my life when he could have taken it. That's not the mark of a monster. It's the proof of a man learning what it means to be human again. Her words silenced the room. Even the sheriff, who'd arrested Jace with a sneer, looked away. But in the end, the law was not easily swayed. The verdict was clear. Guilty, but with a recommendation of mercy. The judge, a grizzled man with weary eyes, had spoken quietly before his gavel fell. "Mr. Callahan, justice demands you pay for your crimes. But redemption," he'd looked at Evelyn then, "sometimes comes dressed as grace. 5 years in prison. It wasn't death. It wasn't freedom. But it was a chance." Now, in the cold gray of morning, Jace heard the familiar sound of boots in the corridor. The sheriff stopped outside his cell. "Time's up, Callahan. Wagon's waiting." Jace rose slowly. "She's gone?" The sheriff hesitated, then nodded toward the door. She was here at dawn. Left you this. He handed Jace a folded letter tied with a pale blue ribbon. Jace's heart tightened as he untied it, the paper trembling in his calloused hands. Jace, by the time you read this, you'll be gone from Dunhill. I wanted to see you, but I knew if I did, I'd never find the strength to let you go. I believe in the man you are now. I'll be waiting, no matter how long it takes. The world is cruel, Jace, but it can still be kind. You taught me that. Maybe when your time is done, we can both start over. Not as outlaw and captive, but as two souls finally free. Evelyn. Jace folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his heart. For the first time in years, he smiled, small, tired, but real. Guess I'll hold you to that, darling, he murmured. 5 years later. The sun was rising over Silver Creek, painting the fields in gold. Evelyn stood by the fence of her rebuilt ranch, the wind tugging at her dress. Life had been quiet since that day, peaceful but incomplete. Every dawn she'd wake before the light broke, half expecting to hear hooves in the distance. And every dawn, she'd whisper the same prayer. Let him come home. That morning, as the mist lifted, she saw a lone rider approaching. Her heart stopped. He was thinner now, rougher, his hair flecked with gray, but there was no mistaking him. Jace Callahan, a free man, riding toward her beneath the rising sun. He stopped a few paces away, dismounting slowly. Neither spoke for a long moment. The air between them shimmered with all the words they hadn't said. Finally, Jace reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered ring, the one he'd forced onto her finger so long ago. He held it out to her, his voice low and trembling. This time, he said, if you'll have me, it's not by force. It's by choice. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She stepped closer, taking the ring and his scarred hand with it. Then this time, she whispered, it's real. The morning light broke fully over them, warm and bright, washing away the ghosts of the past. And as the wind rustled through the fields of Silver Creek, Jace Callahan, the outlaw who once lived by vengeance, finally found what he'd never dared to hope for. Not forgiveness, not freedom, but home.